He had spent 20 years hiding from the world, believing that solitude was the only way to escape his painful past. No friends. No family. No visitors. Just a lonely farm on the edge of the untamed frontier. But everything changed the day an exhausted Apache family appeared at his gate, asking for nothing more than a chance to survive. What he chose to do next would spark an unforgettable journey of trust, sacrifice, and a bond that neither side ever expected. Stay with us, because this remarkable story proves that the family you are born into is not always the family that changes your life forever. The first rays of morning spread across the wide frontier as a lonely farmer stepped onto the porch of his small cabin. The land around him stretched for miles without another home in sight. Tall grass swayed with the wind, and the distant mountains stood like silent guardians over the valley. This was exactly how he wanted it. No visitors. No noisy neighbors. No reminders of the life he had left behind. Every day followed the same quiet rhythm. He gathered eggs from the chicken coop, fed his old horse, and checked the fences that surrounded his fields. His faithful dog followed him everywhere, never asking questions, never expecting more than a gentle pat on the head. The farmer spoke only a few words each day, usually to the animals that had become his only companions. Many years earlier, he had lived in a small frontier town with his wife and young son. They had filled his home with laughter and hope until a deadly fever swept through the settlement. Within a single week, both were gone. The loss broke something inside him that never seemed to heal. He sold everything he owned, traveled deep into the wilderness, and built a cabin where no memories could find him. The nearby settlers often whispered about the strange man who preferred silence over company. Some believed he was unfriendly. Others thought he was hiding from his past. None of them knew the truth. He simply believed that caring for people only invited more pain. As evening settled over the valley, the farmer finished storing fresh vegetables inside the barn. Just before closing the doors, he noticed a thin trail of smoke rising from the hills beyond his land. No families lived in that direction, and travelers rarely passed through the area. He frowned but turned away. Whatever caused the smoke was not his concern. Hours later, as darkness covered the fields, his dog suddenly stood alert and let out a low growl. The farmer grabbed his lantern and old rifle before stepping outside. Near the edge of the barn, faint footsteps moved through the shadows. Someone was there. And they were not alone. The farmer raised his lantern, its warm light pushing back the darkness just enough to reveal 4 frightened figures standing near the barn. A man, a woman, an elderly grandmother, and a small girl clung to one another. Their clothes were worn, their faces covered with dust, and their eyes carried the look of people who had been running for days. No one spoke. The farmer kept one hand on his rifle, but he noticed something that made him pause. The little girl was struggling to remain on her feet. She looked exhausted, and the grandmother leaned heavily against the younger woman for support. Without a word, the farmer lowered his rifle. He pointed toward the open barn and then to the blankets stacked inside. The Apache father studied him carefully before giving a slow nod. His family entered cautiously, never taking their eyes off the stranger who had chosen kindness over fear. The farmer returned a few minutes later carrying fresh bread, dried meat, warm soup, and a bucket of clean water. The little girl reached for the bowl with trembling hands, but before she could take it, she looked at her parents for permission. They nodded, and she smiled for the first time. That simple smile stirred something the farmer had buried years ago. The next morning, the family offered to help without being asked. The Apache father repaired a section of broken fence using sturdy branches gathered from the nearby woods. The mother collected vegetables from the garden and prepared a meal that everyone shared. Even the grandmother found a quiet place beneath a tree where she carefully mended torn clothing. Although they spoke different languages, they slowly learned to understand one another through gestures, patience, and respect. The little girl laughed as she chased the farmer's old dog across the yard, filling the quiet farm with a sound it had not known in many years. For the first time since losing his own family, the farmer found himself smiling without realizing it. As the sun disappeared behind the hills that evening, the Apache father suddenly stopped working and looked toward the distant ridge. His expression changed. Far away, several riders had appeared against the fading light, and they were heading straight toward the farm. The riders reached the farm just before sunset. 5 rough-looking men climbed down from their horses and spread out across the yard. Their leader stepped forward with a cold smile as his eyes scanned the cabin, the barn, and the fields. "We are looking for an Apache family," he said. "They passed through this valley. Hand them over, and we will be on our way." The farmer stood calmly on his porch. His old rifle rested in his hands, but he made no move to raise it. "There is no one here for you," he answered. The outlaw laughed. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be." Behind the barn, the Apache family remained hidden in complete silence. The little girl held her grandmother's hand as the Apache father watched through a narrow gap in the wooden wall. He knew the farmer was risking everything for people he had met only a day before. After searching the property without finding anyone, the outlaws finally rode away. Their leader pointed back toward the cabin before leaving. "We will return." That night, no one slept. The farmer kept watch from his porch while the Apache father quietly walked outside. He looked toward the dark hills and understood that the danger was far from over. If the outlaws returned with more men, the farmer would lose his home because of them. Before dawn, the Apache family gathered their few belongings. The father placed his hand over his heart in silent gratitude. The mother bowed her head, and the little girl hugged the farmer's old dog one last time before following her family into the mist. When the farmer awoke, the barn was empty. Hours later, a cloud of dust rose from the distant trail. The outlaws had returned. This time they were not 5. They were nearly 20. The farmer stepped onto his porch alone, knowing there was nowhere left to run. The outlaws surrounded the farmhouse, their horses stamping the dry ground as dust filled the air. Their leader looked at the farmer with a cruel grin. "You should have listened," he said. "Now you lose everything." The farmer stood firm on his porch, his rifle steady in his hands. He knew he could not stop so many men, but he refused to abandon the home he had built or betray the family he had chosen to protect. The leader raised his hand, ready to give the order to attack. Before he could speak, a sharp cry echoed across the valley. Every outlaw turned toward the hills. Dozens of riders appeared along the ridge. Within moments, more followed until the hillside was covered with Apache warriors. They rode with confidence, surrounding the farm from every direction. The outlaws suddenly realized they had become the ones trapped. At the front rode the Apache father beside an older man with silver streaks in his hair. His calm face carried the quiet authority of a respected chief. The chief guided his horse to the farmhouse and looked directly at the farmer. "You gave shelter to my family when you had every reason to turn them away," he said. "A man who protects the helpless earns the respect of our people." The outlaws quickly dropped their weapons, knowing they had no chance of escape. Without a single shot being fired, they surrendered and were escorted away from the valley. The chief then stepped down from his horse and placed a hand on the farmer's shoulder. "You believed you lived alone," he said with a warm smile. "From this day forward, you have a family among us." The farmer looked at the faces surrounding him. The little girl smiled and ran to hug his old dog once again. Warriors, elders, women, and children welcomed him with grateful eyes. For the first time in many years, the silence inside his heart was finally gone. Seasons came and went, and the lonely farm was never quiet again. Apache families often visited to share fresh game, woven blankets, and stories around evening fires. In return, the farmer shared his harvest, repaired tools, and opened his home to anyone who needed shelter. Word of the friendship spread across the frontier. Settlers who had once feared the Apache slowly changed their minds after seeing the respect and kindness that existed between them. Suspicion gave way to trust, and small acts of cooperation grew into lasting friendships. The little girl who had first arrived frightened and hungry now ran through the fields with a smile that reminded the farmer of the son he had lost. She often called him grandfather, a title that filled the empty place in his heart. One evening, the farmer stood on his porch as the sun disappeared behind the distant mountains. Laughter drifted across the yard where Apache children and settler children played together without fear. Looking at the people gathered around his table, he realized he had spent years searching for peace in solitude. Instead, he had found it in the company of others. The family he had lost could never be replaced, but life had given him another one when he least expected it. Sometimes the greatest gift is not finding a new home. It is discovering the people who make you feel at home. Sometimes the strongest families are not connected by blood but by kindness, courage, and the choices we make when someone needs us most. One lonely farmer opened his door to strangers with nothing to gain, and in return, he found the love, purpose, and belonging he thought he had lost forever. His story reminds us that a single act of compassion can change not only one life, but many. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable frontier legends filled with courage, hope, and inspiring moments from the Old West. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new adventure. We would love to hear from you in the comments. Do you believe that family is created by blood, or by the people who stand beside you when it matters most? Thank you for watching, and until our next journey across the frontier, take care of yourselves, keep kindness alive, and remember that even the loneliest road can lead to a place where you truly belong.